Hello, everybody. I'm Pete Morris, and this is ComancheZOOM for September 10th, Thursday night. We have Gregg Squires on here to talk about get the best glide. And the whole idea is to be able to make it to the scene of the crash in one piece. So here we go. This is, you're now free to unmute and talk. And CJ, you can use your usual, who are you, where are you, and what do you fly?
Well, okay, so I'm CJ, and I usually fly a 180 or a 260B. So yeah, just jump in just like ATC, unmute and say who you are, where you are, what you fly, and welcome.
I'm Darren Gritzmer, fly Comanche 250, based in Victoria, Texas.
All right.
I think I gave your son his flight check.
Recording.
You did, yep. Now he should be joining us tonight. I called him a while ago. We'll see.
Pete, unable to start recording.
Yes, I know.
Okay, my name is Russ Greenlaw. I fly out of Livermore. I'm not there right now. I'm up in the mountains. Comanche 250, very early model that had no documented glide speed. So I went out and figured out what it was by trial and error.
Well done and welcome. Thanks for being here. So, and for all our first time joins, if you, while you're here, we generally have
co-host now, Bernie.
We'll ask you to just go ahead and post your questions into the chat window, which you can usually find by clicking on the three dots that say more and selecting chat. And I'm going to shut up now and say, hey, jump in when you can, anytime you got a quiet space, and just say who you are, where you are, and what you fly.
Rich Bergman, Comanche 260B. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Gillespie Field, El Cajon, Southern California. And one of the last 200 made, and I enjoy it a bunch. And I'll mute myself.
Robert Beard, can you hear me?
Yep.
Loud and clear.
Okay, Robert Beard. I have a Mooney M20J. I used to have a Comanche 250. I'm flying out of Toronto, Ontario, Canada.
Welcome, Robert, and good to have you.
Thank you.
And for those who just joined, feel free to just jump in, say who you are, where you are, and what you fly. You'll need to unmute.
Afternoon, Andy White, Colo, California, fly a 180.
Good to have you, Andy. 180s rock.
I'm Leland Spanger, Cozad, Nebraska, 260 Comanche.
Leland, it's good to have you. Thanks for joining.
Evan Smith from Richmond, Virginia. I have a 1958 250, serial number 119.
Brilliant. Good to have you, Evan. Welcome.
That's older than mine.
Clyde Davis, Tehachapi, California, flying a 260B.
Welcome, Clyde, and thanks for being here.
Well, hi, I'm Bob Dempsey. I have a Comanche 250, and I'm based out of Sierra Vista, Arizona, but more in Georgia. So I'm out here with her. I just flew her out this past weekend, and yeah, working out of mid-Georgia.
A super cross-country trip. Welcome, and thanks for being here.
I'm Bill Price, fly a 1963 180 Comanche.
Welcome, Bill, one of the last 180s.
And it's Rochester, New York.
You know Ron Ward probably with the twin Comanche.
Just 2 hangars down.
Brilliant. One of my favorite people. Welcome and thanks for joining.
Yep.
Hey, this is Jeff Truitt. I'm a newcomer, Durham, North Carolina. Right now I have an experimental Peel Diamond looking to trade up to a Comanche.
Yeah, good way to put it.
Welcome, Jeff,
Good.
and good job.
Yeah, for those of you that are on and want to get Wings credit, it is available tonight, but you need to register so we have your name and email number, and you also need to sign in on the Zoom here with a name that we can identify. You know, iPhone number 3 does not count.
All right.
You know, you each have the option of renaming yourself, and that's the way you would do it.
How do we do that?
Somewhere down there, there's a thing that says more,
Right.
and you might have a chance there.
To rename yourself, one of the ways you can do it, depending, like I'm in on an iPhone and I automatically join as iPhone. So I click on participants, which if you click on your screen, there's a little thing that usually shows on the bottom, and this will vary depending on whether you're in from a Mac, a PC, an iPhone, or an iPad. Where on the iPad, it's on the top. But for me, I click on participants and then I click on my own icon, and it will give me an option to rename.
Yeah, in fact, if you click on the picture of yourself, there's a mute, and then 3 blue dots. Click on the 3 blue dots. Then it says rename as an option in that screen.
That's the place. Yep.
Well done, Evan. And well, I've got you. Where are you and what do you fly?
I fly a Comanche 180 out of Washougal, Washington.
Welcome. And again, another wonderful 180. Thanks for being here. And actually, Jim Peters, since you've been a regular, I wanted you to just re-intro because I kind of caught you before we started and ask you what your impression is and your suggestions.
My impression of what?
Well, what we're doing, Comanches.
Brisbane, Australia. I've got a twin Comanche, as you can see, which I've had for 42 years. What else?
Well done, Jim. 42 years. That is brilliant. I think we need to create an over 40 years award for those of you who have had your Comanches for over 40 years, because there is a collection of them.
Yeah, the award will probably be a sling.
Now.
How does 51 years count?
You are awesome. So you got your bird 51 years, and you're what year again?
It's a 1958, serial number 415.
So you were her
Got
second?
It in May of 69.
Well done. And Pat Kiefer just texted in and from Texas, and her plane's been in her family since new. So welcome, Pat, and thank you. So you're in the 40 plus award list. We probably really should put together something. It would be too fun. Just pop into any quiet moment, folks, and just say who you are, where you are, and what you fly. You'll need to unmute and then remute.
1970, 50 years old.
And Bernie, do you want to say who you are, where you are, and what you fly?
I'm Bernie Stumpf. I fly out of Westerly, Rhode Island in a PA 24 260B, and I've had the plane since 1994.
Welcome and thanks for all the work you're doing as part of the ComancheZOOM team.
I will jump in. I'm Mark Sullivan. I live in Westlake Village, California. I fly out of Camarillo, California. I have a 1966 turbo twin Comanche, had it since 1997. Put 2 airlift sons and airline jobs through that airplane. I'm also a partner in the STC group Trio Autopilots out of Oxnard, California.
And Mark is important. I'm going to just take a moment out of this intro period. Mark and the STC group have the STC for certificated aircraft for the Trio Autopilot. And so Mark's important because the STC group has just initiated a project to get the Trio approved for the Piper Comanche twins and singles. And for those of you who were present for the Autopilot ComancheZOOM series, which included Garmin and Genesis and the STC group with the Trio Pro Pilot, the one missing component was that nobody was doing anything for the twins, and then only Genesis was doing anything for the early models and the 400. So we're pleased to announce the project to get the Trio Pro Pilot approved for all of the Comanches but the 400s. So send your interest to Mark. And there's a group buy special that's just been negotiated. That's in a contract you can download. If
and the problem is, as you all will recognize, this little bad boy, it now has to go to Autopilot Central to be repaired. And I'm hoping to retire it with the rest of the Century 3, which works great when it works. But the question is when it works.
Yep. I'm Jim Terry, and I fly Comanche 260B out of Lewisburg, Tennessee. First time to participate in your Zoom meetings.
Cool. Welcome.
Jim, welcome, and thanks for being here.
You're welcome.
And Francois, welcome.
I'm Ron Richmond. I fly a Comanche 400 turbocharged out of Fullerton, California.
Ron, welcome back. And I have an email that I never quite sent to you and a bunch of other 400 drivers. So I forgot about that and I'll get it out.
I've been looking for it.
Sorry about that. Things got busy. Welcome.
Thank you.
Oh, Craig Hammond, 1960 250 Comanche out of Fort Sill, Lawton, Oklahoma. Had that plane now since 2003. 2004, something like that.
Well done and welcome.
Enjoy it. And I've been involved in these now almost from the beginning. I guess I missed the first one, but really, thanks for putting them on.
Thanks for being part of them, Craig. Your input's been super helpful.
Yeah. Once again, I'm going to mention. I'm looking through quickly on the names, and I see a few. Like user, for instance, that's going to be hard to credit Wings credit to. So please rename yourself with the name that we can identify with if you're trying to get Wings credit.
Well, you have lots of users.
Dave, welcome. Say who you are, where you are.
Hi, CJ. Well, I'm in sunny Florida, still flying my 180. And just trying to stay ahead of the game.
Welcome, and thanks for supporting us technically all these years. Dave Gittleman's been one of the technical resources to Comanche drivers, and we're just delighted to have him on.
Well, it's very nice of you to say that.
It's been very nice of you to support us. Thanks.
I'm Ray Fay from Madison, Wisconsin. I fly a 260B model.
Hey, Ray.
Good to see you, Ray, and thanks for being back.
Yeah, thank you.
Good morning, Ray.
Say again?
Good morning. Good afternoon. Good night.
Yeah, good morning, Jim.
From Australia, yeah. I don't know why I'm here about gliding, because I don't hope to glide in a twin Comanche.
Well, you wait and see. You're going to be surprised.
We're hoping you never have to glide in your twin Comanche, but if you ever do.
Hi, I'm Fred Hofstetter, flying out of Concord, California, 250 named Bessie. I've owned her about 3.5 years now, and I've been to a few of these before.
Good.
Welcome, Fred and Bessie. It's great to have you in, and I think this is the first time I recall seeing you, so thanks for chiming.
I've just been disguised in the other ones.
Well done, sir. Well, welcome, and happy to have you out of disguise. By the way, I love Bessie.
She's a sweetheart. That was one of the things when I bought her. It was like, you have to keep the name. And I said, not a problem.
Oh, that is even better. So you inherited that name for her previous family.
Yes.
Well done. Well, welcome everybody. Just jump into any quiet spot and say who you are, where you are, and what you fly. And some people are posting into the chat window.
Hi, this is Lonnie. I fly a 1960 180 from Charlotte, North Carolina. We're excited. We're flying our 2-month-old grandbaby to Boston tomorrow to see his 93-year-old great-great-grandmother. and we were actually able to find a headset to fit a 2-month-old on Pilot Mall. And so this is going to be quite an adventure.
Good luck getting her to keep her headset on, and welcome Lonnie and Lauren.
While you guys are chit-chatting, I'm going to share the our help needed thing. You can go ahead and keep sharing.
What about the quarantine problem in Massachusetts for the guy going to Boston?
You know, that's a good question. I haven't even considered that. Is that at an FBO or is that just the major airports?
I don't know. You might want to check into it before you get there, because it could be a problem.
Well, thank you for that. I didn't even consider that possibility. I'll check into that tonight. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'll draw your attention to the screen now with the business here in the middle about getting wings credit.
So in short, you want to go to FAAsafety.gov if you've never registered for wings credit, and sign up and say you're interested in wings credit. Some of the benefits of wings credit in short are that your insurance company many of the insurance underwriters will provide a 5% discount on your insurance, which, as many of us are painfully aware, is getting either expensive or hard to get. And we're working on that. More on that at another time. In addition to that, the WINGS program now can be used towards your safety review, your BFR. So 3 of these ground credits, of which this would qualify for 1, and then covering 3 points on a flight with an instructor would allow you to qualify for your BFR. Then to finish your registration, just let us know that you're interested in wings credit for this by going to northeastcomanche.org. And under the ComancheZOOM, there's something is near the bottom, Pete, called register.
Right there at the top of the page.
Mm-hmm.
There's a registration link.
Yep. And then it's a very small, simple form. And that's it. We'll sort you out and send your information over to the FSDO, and they will issue you wings credit.
This
all it takes is those 2 registrations.
I keep saying you got to have your name tonight, something that we can identify if you want wings credit, because, you know, like iPhone and user doesn't work.
Can we register retroactively?
Yes, you can.
Thank you.
All we have to do is show that you were here for more than 45 minutes.
Yep. And you'll need to register within 24 hours.
Yeah.
Because we do send that list over as quickly as we can. And the FSDO has been great about trying to get us credit as quickly as we can. But yeah, we've been getting super support for the series. They're all safety and education oriented. Thanks, Pete. Good point.
Hi, everyone. I'm Adam. I'm 19 years old from the UK. I fly a Comanche 180, which is Golf Alpha X-Ray Mike Alpha. It's probably well known as the only rental Comanche in the entire UK. And I'm the kid that's been annoyingly posted to all your Facebook posts trying to fly around the world in a Piper Comanche, and sort of in the stages of acquiring one, looking at a few airplanes to acquire in order to achieve that goal.
Brilliant. Adam, welcome, and a great aspiration. There is one other pilot that's dying to do a round the world flight. Do you want to be introduced in case you guys want to team up? He's an A&P.
Yeah, well, if he's an A&P, then yes.
Okay.
As soon as you said A&P, I'm interested.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. His name's Joke, and I'll private message you guys.
Well,
and, if you could.
Yeah.
I
was thinking to do it solo, but if I, in fact, I suppose that's not necessarily mandatory because I can always do it again later.
Brilliant. Yeah, he's another 180 driver.
Just out of curiosity, Adam, what time is it there?
It is midnight, 20 past midnight.
Yeah.
I've read you guys were doing this at 11 Zulu, and I thought, oh, that's fine, 10 o'clock. No.
Oops. Yeah. We do have an earlier one that's going to be scheduled for the review of critical stuff to know about adjusting the landing gear, which will be with Hans Newbert, a DER from California, and Matt Kirk, who is ComancheGear.com out of Florida. And Matt has said to me very firmly, I am not doing this at 7 o'clock at night. I've got my martini and my feet up on the counter.
7
So
o'clock.
I,
7
that's
o'clock
Eastern.
practically still work day for us.
I know. But Matt is an early to rise, early to bed guy. So he said, I will do it, but it has to be earlier. So that will be good for all of you in the UK, a bit early for those of you in Australia, but probably 7 a.m. And for the rest of us, we will manage.
I think last time I checked, I think I was one of the youngest people who'd sort of be a Comanche enthusiast like I am. 19 is definitely, there's not many of us.
No, there are about 20 of you, or maybe, no, I think at this point we are now up to 40 or so people in their 20s, but 19 in their teens. Yeah, you're
Well, I
you're in the
started
early-
flying it. I started flying when I was 14, and I fell in love with the Comanche when I was 15, and I started flying it when earlier this year. But I actually first tried to get into the group when I was 18.
Well done.
So I've been a young bloomer. I'm hoping to be flying a 260 because that's obviously going to be the best option with 6 cylinders to get around. And I've got a nice one out in California that she's been hit by an auto gyro and needs a bit of work.
Adam wants a 400.
I want a 400. I want his 400.
Oh yeah. Hey John.
How are you guys? John Gritsky. I fly out of Lake in the Hills, Illinois, Crystal Lake area, northwest suburbs of Chicago. Some of you, particularly Ron and Fullerton, might recognize my 400. Used to belong to Fred Woolridge up in Brownsville.
Gotcha. Would you mind tossing a note into the chat window that you're one of the 400s, and I'll add you into the email to Rod?
Sure, no problem.
All right.
Hope to be one of that team one day.
Yeah.
Adam and I have been chatting on Instagram quite a bit.
Oh, nice. Well, Stephen Osborne has 2, and he's considering.
That's greedy.
Yeah, I know, Steve.
Yep. Yeah. Well, he is considering listing that project, which is the Turbo 400, which just needs some cylinders, but we'll see. He may also be able to get her restored and then sell the other operating 400.
Some cylinders, is that 8?
8 cylinders. Yep.
Buy a
Corey
new
Kroll's
airplane
got
for the
that.
cost of that, couldn't you?
Right.
Oh gosh,
Yep.
for the overhaul, yeah. Corey
Yep,
Kroll
I
has
just
tattooed on his 8 cylinders of fire-breathing, lycoming something. It's pretty funny. And he's got drogue chute tattooed over his baggage compartment door. Anyways, keep jumping in, everybody. But if John, if you could toss your email in and just put 400 next to it into the chat, I'll make sure that I add you onto the email to Ron and all the other 400 guys.
Not a problem.
Hey, this is Murray Collette in New Hampshire, fly at 59-250. And behind me is my son, Kevin, who just got his IFR certificate and now working on high performance and complex to get into a Comanche someday.
Hey, Murray, you going to make it to Parlin for Saturday?
Oh, I didn't know. I missed that. I will look. I think I can.
Parlin is doing their phantasmagorical fireworks display. The airport is closed from 4 o'clock till 11 o'clock at night, but you're welcome to get there.
Okay. I will look into that. I might end up driving there, so I don't have to stick around the entire time. But
that'll work.
Thanks for the info.
Yeah. Welcome, Murray, who's got a 250 with tip tanks and a very unusual 337 history of oxes. And welcome, Kevin. Good to see you. One of our other under 20s. Wait, Kevin, are you over 20
No,
now?
not anymore. He's
okay.
No, Kevin's now 21. So
oh, Lordy.
Gentleman from the UK hasn't beat.
Yep. Good to see you.
This is Danny from Australia. How are you?
Hey, Danny. Good to see you. How are you?
Yeah, same. Yeah, very well, thank you. I own a 250. I'm yet to take delivery of it. I'm still waiting on a set of HT leads to come out of the States for my new Shorefly Magneto. Hopefully I'll have that resolved within the next few weeks, and I might get to sit in the seat finally. So yeah, that's where I'm at. And by the way, I'm definitely not under 20.
Brilliant and welcome. Danny, don't forget to give Surefly Tribe 20, just tribe like Indian tribe 20. And that gets you a discount. And it won't help you too much with the shipping, but it'll give you a discount on the Surefly.
I purchased my Shorefly as part of the Shorefly Oshkosh 2020 deal that they were running, and it's not as good as the Comanche one. I think they offered 15% at the time for the Oshkosh special.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, we have been so fortunate that both Electro Air and Surefly electronic. So Surefly is a magneto replacement, and it is so there are two magneto replacements systems. One is Surefly, which is a straight magneto replacement, very quick to install, relatively inexpensive to buy, and it does have an approved STC approved variable advanced timing for the Comanche, and a 2,200 hour lifetime. So you will stop having to do magneto maintenance, and they're offering a group buy discount for Comanches. And then Electro Air electronic ignition adds an induction coil, and both of them will tend to give you improvements in manifold pressure at altitude and improvements in fuel burn. In general, you will have an increased improvement in manifold pressure and fuel burn with the Electro Air system. It is a bit more expensive and a bit more involved to install because of the induction coil and because they're locating some parts on the pilot side of the firewall. But they are two of the only systems we know of where you can actually install them in a Comanche, and they will pay you back as long as you're flying 50 to 75 hours a year. So both Electro Air and Surefly are doing their best ever group buy offers for the Comanches. So we're pretty excited that they're supporting us this way.
If I could hop in with a question there, in terms of reliability on the Surefly and the Electro Air stuff, is that then gonna be a sensible option for me, considering the project I've got planned, the long distance flying in a very short space of time? Is that going to be a good option for me to fit that, or should I consider more EIS systems instead?
Well, those are the only two electronic ignition systems that I know of that are approved for the Comanche. And so those are your choices as far as I know. Both of them are well proven in the field. Surefly is the newest one. The approval for Comanche is relatively recent, but they came out of the experimental field, and they've got 4,000 of them installed in the experimentals. And the firmware, to the best of my knowledge, has not changed much. With either one, I would definitely recommend getting it installed, and then just because of the type of mission you guys are looking at doing, flying, 20, 30 hours first.
We've got to ferry her home first, which will give us a good amount of time to practice. So.
Yeah. So they're both solid systems.
Let me ask Adam a question. What are you going to spend most of your time at or above 10,000 feet, or are you going to be low?
I plan to get my instrument rating so that I can do that, but I do plan to stay under 10,000 as much as I can, so I don't need to be wearing oxygen and things like that.
Okay, well, here's the thing. You really don't get much of an advantage from the electronic ignition unless you get up high in altitude.
So that could be something to consider then. If I have got those systems, I could consider to climb higher then to make sure I get the best use out of those.
Right. Take a look at their charts and the advance curves versus altitude. You'll see that they don't.
I've been flying around
I'm sorry?
I've been flying around 75 to 95 and getting about 2 gallon saving.
Okay.
My experience is also that flying anywhere in the 6,000 range to 9,000 range, you still experience a 1 to 2 gallon per hour savings. So the two questions I would have for the person who said he's making a long distance trip, I guess, was it Adam, is first, why would you be limiting yourself to under a 6,000 or 8,000? I would think that unless you're going westbound your entire trip, that you're going to want to be in the 7 to 10,000 range, or 8,000 to 11,000.
I definitely want to be up at 8,000-9,000, but I was considering staying as far out of 10 just so I wouldn't just in terms of oxygen.
Oxygen is not necessary until you go past 12,500, as you probably know.
That may not be true in where he's from.
It's 10,000 here in the UK.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. Okay. Well, anyway, even if you're under 10,000, you will still see a 1 to 2 gallon an hour savings.
So it's probably going to be, it's going to pay for itself for me to fit that to the plane anyway, especially considering we're sending the engine off for an overhaul anyway. So it'd probably be good
if you're doing that, by all means, yeah. And I think both of the people that spoke up, Malcolm and Craig, are talking about the Electro Air system. Is that right, Malcolm and Craig?
My only experience is with the Electro Air. I haven't flown behind a short.
Yeah, mine's Electro Air also. Because
Yep.
of because it burns so hot and so long, it burns more efficiently. So even
Yep.
if you're not experiencing the altitude benefits of the advancement and the timing, it's the hotness of the burn that gets you there.
Yeah.
DJ, I think you had Comanche Zooms from each of those two companies within the
That's
past
right.
month or so. Was there
Exactly.
any kind of, when you, after having been at both of those, did you come away with a sense of that the Electro Air is worth the extra cost, or that did you come up with a sense of the total installed cost of each system?
Yep. So I would recommend both systems. The SureFly is a quicker, cheaper install with, from what we can tell from the early returns, slightly less fuel savings and probably slightly less improvement in manifold pressure, just because you're replacing your harness and you've got the induction coil and the Electro Air. If you're flying the Electro Air, it's a more expensive, slightly more expensive kit and a more involved install, but you get a greater fuel burn savings. For a mission like Adams, which is to fly around the world, probably my tendency would be to look at the Electro Air, but I would have to say that for any Comanche, because our wing is so great at altitude, that the electronic ignition, the variable advanced timing, get one or the other. They're just obvious great fits for our
I
airplanes.
did about 4,000 flying the 180 here in the UK, so I need to get some real high altitude practice in. The problem is we get into Class A airspace over about 6,000 here in the UK, whereas I'm gonna be spending a vast majority of the trip over Russia and Europe, and America.
You would want your instrument rating for any round the world trip, no matter what. So,
oh, for sure.
I'm going to call a time check on us just because we did advertise this is starting at 2 minutes ago and hand it over to Pete. But we can, at the end of it, continue. Yeah, but at the end of this, we can return to this discussion and continue it. So thanks everyone for being here. And this is Pete Morse, who's going to introduce our speaker.
Okay, I just muted everybody so you don't have background noise. And I would suggest everybody go to the speaker view if you have that option. That way you'll see a big picture of who is talking. And who is talking tonight is Gregg Squires. He's a DER from, designated pilot examiner, DPE, okay, from Texas. And he did this presentation at Oshkosh a couple of years back, and it was well received. It is definitely available for wings credit. I've been through how you get that, but you're gonna love it. So I'll let Gregg take over at this point. He's going to share all this stuff, and he'll have to unmute himself so he can talk.
I think I have myself unmuted, and I want to thank CJ and everyone for inviting me to do this. I am also a Comanche owner. I have a 260B. The serial number is 4570 on that airplane. And I did check, Malcolm, just so it originally came out of the factory as 139 Charlie Alpha. So that's an original N number on that airplane. All right, you want me to get started?
Yes, you're up, you're on.
All right, give us a second just to get these screens going here. And hopefully this is all going to work. And I am Gregg Squires. I'm a DPE for airplanes and gliders in the San Antonio FSDO. I've been doing DPE work for just about 20 years now. Started off in New York as a glider examiner, and I actually covered 4 FSDOs. I covered from the tip of Long Island all the way out to Harris Hill, and from Saratoga down to Teterboro. And then when I came out to Texas, I became an airplane examiner and started doing single engine and seaplanes here. And as I mentioned, That's my Comanche. 260B, that's out in Sedona, Arizona.
We don't see it yet.
You don't see it?
Not yet.
Well, I don't know why. I've got that screen shared. So you're going to have to tell me what to do here because.
Were you on a double screen again?
I am on a double screen, but.
Try the other screen.
You've got the correct screen.
We're looking at the picture of your face as opposed to the shared screen.
Well, maybe it didn't do it. Alrighty. Let me go back out and see if the screen didn't share. Maybe it didn't share. I set that. I hit share.
Ew, now we're sharing something.
Now we're sharing something.
We have the tent.
Okay. You're going to have to give me just a second because otherwise this program is not going to like it. Just bear with me. Let me reopen this. And I'll be back to you in a second. Almost there. Well, believe it or not, just crashed on me. So stand by, we'll try once more.
All right, we see you back up. So I'll just finish talking about the electronic ignition since we can while you're working on that.
Thank you.
In short, the benefits mainly are just you're going to get easier starting, less maintenance, an improved manifold pressure at altitude, and less fuel burn with either of them.
CJ, Danny here. Can I ask a question?
There we go.
Okay, we're up.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. And Danny, yes, at the end.
Sure.
Oh, sorry about that. I think the internet has got this so slow that it doesn't want to advance. Well,
Do you have any other apps or programs running?
No.
Can be closed, or would it help if you or any of us turned off our video?
I don't know. Having not done this before this way, I can't tell you, but it certainly, I have a little circle here just spinning around.
Yep, that's a local thing happening on your machine, Greg. Yep, the circle thing spinning around is local, unfortunately. But yeah, and this all went beautifully on the test flight last night. So we've got a local new thing. So well,
I'll tell you what. If you give me a minute, finish your talk on the
electronic ignition. Sure.
The electronic ignition, and I'm gonna get off of Wi-Fi and get on an Ethernet cable and see if that doesn't solve the problem.
That should work. Thanks. Could be your computer as well. So Danny, go ahead with the question on electronic ignition.
CJ, I seem to
Well,
remember
maybe
that
restart.
the electro.
Sorry, say
CJ, I
again,
seem to
Danny.
remember that the electro air system also had the replacement for the key system, that you could take out the old key system to overcome that, because one of the problems with the Shorefly is that you can get that perceived drop because of the dead spot in the key. I was keen to put one of the electro air replacements in there. Do you know if we can purchase that if we're not purchasing the electro air EIS, and do you know if we can install that in the Comanche? Does the STC cover that, installing it in the Comanche when you're not installing the electro air EIS?
This is a rare event when I can actually answer a question. The answer is yes to both. So the nice thing is Electro Air actually decoupled all of the components of their system and gave us a great discount, and you can buy it either as a group, as a bundle, or you can buy the individual pieces. Their switch does work well with Surefly, and both these vendors, by the way, are very complementary of each other's products. You know, they're sort of, they work well with each other. So yes, you can buy the Tempest fine wire plugs, which are a huge discount at I think $69 with the group buy special. The massives at $29 are a slight discount, but they're relatively inexpensive. And what those plugs are is they're gapped for the longer, stronger spark of the electronic ignition from Electro Air. I've heard a rumor, although I don't know if this is approved, that they work as well as Surefly. And then the switch panel is which is what you're asking about, which allows you to replace the key with a switch and gets rid of that weird drop when you're doing your mag check and you're going from your Surefly mag, which is the magneto replacement, to your regular mechanical mag. That does work fine with either system. And I believe it's discounted, don't quote me because I have to go and check, but I'll do that while we're talking here, at $135 as opposed to something like $250 US.
CJ,
and what is that product called, CJ?
I will find the actual ID for the product and I'll post it. Do you want me to post that into the chat window?
Yeah, that would be great if you could do that. And also what code we quote when we're ordering it, so that we get the Comanche discount.
You bet, I will do that. And for everybody just joining, we are just troubleshooting a quick slow internet project with Gregg Squires, our presenter on Bus Glide. And in the meanwhile, what we're talking about is electronic ignition systems for the Comanche, because there are both vendors of magneto replacements have been kind enough to support our Comanches with, I think, the best group buy specials they've ever done for any airplane. So for those of you who are like, wait, aren't we supposed to be talking about Best Glide? Yes, and that's going to be going in just a moment.
So just a
couple of comments with regards to the Surefly, CJ. The kit as supplied by Surefly to me through Aircraft Spruce, it came. Everybody's aware that you have to have the separate power circuit to power it. Well, the Surefly, the Comanche with the battery and the master solenoid being down the back of the plane, that's probably around about 14 feet of distance away. Well, the amount of wire that's supplied as part of the kit, it's about, a yard long. So therefore, if you're going to use theirs, you're going to have to cut and splice. I think that there probably needs to be a little bit of feedback that goes back to them, that the length of that power lead needs to be more appropriate to the model of aircraft that they're supplying to. So that's, that's the first comment. And the other thing is that and I'm sure all the Comanche drivers know this, but it caught me out, and that's why I haven't taken ownership of my plane yet, is that the Surefly uses the slick high tension lead set, and so if you're running a Bendix system, then you're going to have to buy a new high tension lead. I just think that it would be good for Surefly to make that more more explicit on their website, and perhaps even offer it as an add-on to their kit price, because it's added probably 6 weeks to my project just because of the EHT or the high tension lead set.
I will text that over to Jason, the GM at Surefly right now. So that's great feedback. And I think, Gregg, are you good to go?
I don't know if you have a picture of a Comanche up there. I may be.
I have a picture of a very beautiful maroon and white Comanche that looks like yours.
Let's see if we can continue. Hopefully this is going to work better. I changed the internet connection. So, all right. So in having done many years of flight tests for single engine pilots, one of the things that I've found is that most pilots fly around like the engine's never going to stop. And it's can be rather disconcerting to have somebody who is approaching an airport with a 1,500-foot traffic pattern, and the applicant descends from 3,500 to 1,300 feet, 12 miles from the airport. And you know, now that's 100% reliance on the fact that that engine is going to keep running. And yes, there's many situations where ATC might put you in that situation, but given a choice, why wouldn't you want to stay higher? These modern power plants are very reliable. Everything from this Antonov AN2 that's up there to the engines that's in that that Cub. Has anybody ever flown? We don't have much feedback here, so I can't ask a lot of questions, I guess. That Antonov is actually one of 2 that's in the United States, and pretty interesting airplane. It's a 1,000 horsepower single engine airplane. So if the engine does suddenly fail, you wind up going from this to that, or possibly even to that. And we often work on the premise that the propeller is the fan that keeps the pilot cool. And if you don't believe him, if you don't believe that that's true, just watch him sweat when it stops. So engine failures happen even to the big boys. And we're going to cite a couple of instances of that happening. First one was a Transair flight, Transair 236. It was from Lisbon, Portugal, going to Lisbon, Portugal, from Toronto, Canada. Lost all power while flying over the Atlantic Ocean. Had a complete power failure due to a fuel leak and caused by improper maintenance. The airplane flew to a successful emergency landing in the Azores, 306 people on board. Everybody survived it, walked away from it. There's the tires. It was a short runway. But they managed to, the glide from total engine failure was about 85 miles. Another famous one is the Gimli glider. This aircraft was an Air Canada Flight 143, had a total engine failure due to fuel starvation. The reason that they had the fuel starvation was that they calculated the fuel in pounds instead of kilograms. And they were 41,000 feet when both engines stopped. They flew for 45 miles and landed on an airfield which was being used as a drag strip. And the interesting part about this is that the truck that came to pick up the airplane, because they actually flew it out of there, that truck ran out of fuel on the way to go get them. Okay, so catastrophic engine failures do happen, and this one really came apart. I had a friend and flight instructor candidate. So they're out there flying around and it's time to go home. And the question is, well, do we scoot down underneath the Class C?
We don't have
And,
any audio.
Pardon me?
We don't have audio.
Yeah.
You
Greg,
lost
when
my
you
audio?
started, yeah, we lost your audio just as you switched over to this screen, and you were starting to break up on the previous one. I don't know if it'd be
Okay.
possible to back up, because now you sound fine.
All right. Let's see if we go back. But we're talking about the catastrophic engine failure. And
The audio is crazy again.
I'm sorry, I don't know what to do, guys.
I actually do. Greg, do you have a cell phone? Because your video is fine. And
Okay.
if I can give you the dial-in number, which if you don't mind, I'll text to you.
Okay.
You'll dial in from one phone. You'll be presenting from your computer. Would that work for you?
Okay.
All right. It'll be texted to you in 2 seconds.
Just waiting for it to come in.
That sounded great right there.
The audio's there? Well, let's move on and see if I can't, and then if all else fails, I'll get on the phone thing. So catastrophic engine failures, they don't happen often, but when they do, they can really come apart. And one thing to consider is, when do these engines fail? Well, most times they fail during a power change. And it's because during a power change, you put the most stress on the crankshaft, whether you're adding power or pulling it back, all that energy's got to go someplace. And when you're pulling the power back, you've got the propeller spinning out there, and all the energy tries to go back into the crankshaft as you're trying to slow the engine down. So, as I was saying, I had a friend in Alaska. He was flying with a CFI candidate. They were doing maneuvers over point possession, and they decided to go over the top to get home rather than scooting underneath the Class C airspace here. So they got back, they turned the airplane over to the next guy, and he went out, ran the airplane up, and before they got through the run up, the crankshaft failed, the propeller separated from the airplane with a catastrophic engine failure. So, if that engine had failed when they were over point possession and they went into that water, they would have had about 2 minutes of useful consciousness, and in 30 minutes they would have been gone. This is a picture of a LL 747 where the engine actually fell off the aircraft. And after that happened, that was in 1993, Boeing put out a statement that they were proposing modifications to make it less likely that this would happen. Reno Air Races, where guy actually lost the blade on his propeller. He's lucky he got that stopped before the engine actually tore out of the airplane. And we all know about the New York incident on the Hudson. The one thing that all these pilots had in common was they're all glider pilots. Every one of the captains on these commercial airliners had glider training. Scully was a glider.
On again.
Yes, are we on again?
Now you're good.
Okay. So we're going to take a flight in a Cessna 172 from my airport in Texas here to an airport down south, New Braunfels, 191 magnetic heading, distance of 50.8 miles. We have good weather. Winds are 150 at 20, which is typical for Texas at 6,000 feet, and a gross takeoff weight of 2,175 pounds. And here's what that flight will look like. And so right here, we're going to assume that we have a catastrophic engine failure. The question now becomes, where are you going? Well, you got Austin Bergstrom over here, and there's Lakeway Airport up here, and not much else around here. So let's think about what the altitudes that we might choose to go down here. The elevation in this area ATC is going to want you at least 3,000 in that area, but they will often restrict you at 3,000 or below. But we have from the point of engine failure to Bergstrom, 9.7 miles on a 099 heading. To get to Lakeway, we have a 321 heading, 11.4 miles. And the question is, what are we going to do if we have a catastrophic engine failure? And what are we trained to do? Well, we're trained to pitch for best glide, look for a suitable landing place, mixture, props, go through the whole emergency checklist, and then start talking if things don't get better. But what do we really do when that engine stops? The first thing most people do is just deny it. This hasn't happened to me. And, I've got to start thinking about now, what am I going to do? Trying to remember what the wind aloft was. Where am I going to land? They start thinking, why did it stop? But all this time that's going by, we have the most precious thing that we have in the bank going away, which is altitude. Okay. So if you pitch for your best glide in the airplane, what usually happens is most pilots will get there, but they don't bother to trim for it. So as soon as they start doing something else, checking the fuel, checking the tanks, they wind up losing that best glide speed. The nose goes down, the speed builds up, and all the altitude starts going away. Okay. Well, in the Cessna 172, in the POH, they actually give you a best glide and a chart showing what they are at different weights. And the best glide speed increases as the weight increases. If you're familiar with glider flying, you know that guys who do long distance glider flying and glider racing will put ballast in the airplane to make it heavier. And the idea of making it heavier is that you get the same glide ratio, but faster. So if you had two gliders that were the same, one had water in it and one didn't, and they were at the same altitude going to the same point, they would both glide to the same point on the surface, but the heavier one's going to get there faster. Okay. So what they're looking for, is the speed that you're looking for when you're going for best glide, is a speed the glider pilots call the best L over D. And the best L over D gives us the most distance covered for the least altitude lost. And there's a polar curve in glider books that shows you where that speed is. It's where the tangent meets the glider sink rate line. And you see that there's only one place on that line where things, where the glide ratio is at its optimum. And as you go faster, that sink rate really goes up dramatically because the induced drag on the glider goes up so much. So that's why it's so important that when we pitch for that best glide, that we trim for it also and make sure that we can maintain that speed. The other speed that glider pilots are interested in is minimum sink, because minimum sink gives us the most time in the air. So if you were to have a catastrophic engine failure right over the airport, you'd want to go for minimum sink, which is slower than best glide, because it's going to keep you in the air the longest. You're not going to get any place, but it's just going to keep you in the air the longest and give you the most time to deal with the situation. Okay. So we have two choices. We can head for Austin on a 09 heading at 9.7 miles, or we could head for 3 Romeo 9 on a heading of 321. Now we're assuming that we have chosen an altitude of 6,500 feet to do this flight. Now you may think that's a high altitude for a short flight of 50 miles, but you know it's going to take you more time to get there, and it's going to cost you a little more fuel to get up there. But believe me, if you have a catastrophic engine failure, the cost of climbing is not going to be on your mind. And so looking at it again, that's one option. And we can use a formula to go through and figure out what our glide angle over the ground is going to be. And it looks like that, where we're looking at about a 10-to-1 glide ratio. We're pitching for 70, and we come up with a glide ratio of 7.57 to 1 because of the 17-knot headwind that we have trying to get to Bergstrom. If we look at the other side of this, I can get my cursor back here. There we go. We're not going to make it to Austin. We look at the other side of it. We have a longer distance to go, but we've got almost a 19-knot tailwind, and we can actually make it to Rusty Allen. To Lakeway Airport. The glide ratio works out to be 12.71 to 1. And this is assuming that you're doing everything right here. So we can make 3 Romeo 9. So actually the best airport for us is actually in back of us at this point. Now, all that math is great, but right now we have programs, both Garmin Pilot and ForeFlight, that will do all this for us. And let's see if we can get this to go here. There we go. So stopping right there, you can see that Austin's not a possibility anymore, but 3 Romeo 9 or Lakeway is. And, you know, it's going to be close. A glider pilot would normally, for a cross-country flight, figure half of his best L over D for planning. But, I mean, here we're using it all up. But we'd still get to actually Lakeway with enough altitude that we would have to, you know, we'd be almost at pattern altitude when we got there. All right. If you were at 3,000 feet, that would be the distance that you could glide. And if you chose 2,000 feet, it goes down to that. So at the moment that an engine fails, whoops, sorry about that. At the moment that an engine fails, you've begun a negotiation. You want airspeed, and gravity wants you on the ground. And the only thing that you have to trade for that airspeed is altitude. So the things to remember is that, one, you can never stretch a glide, because any other place other than that best L over D speed is just going to get you on the ground faster. And glider pilots are always aware of that trade-off. So a glider pilot would deal with the situation by, one, knowing the best glide speed, having an idea what the winds are, immediately pitch and trim for best L over D, and once at best L over D, maintain that precise airspeed control. Another thing to remember is you want to keep your control movements to a minimum. If you must make a turn about 45 degrees of bank and get it over with, and just make the turn and then get your wings level again. You have to maintain your situational awareness. And the way a glider pilot lands is he takes a spot and puts it in the windshield and uses the dive brakes on the airplane to control the descent. So he puts that spot about 2 inches up in the windscreen, and now the object is to keep it there. If the spot starts to go up in the windshield, that's bad. That means you're going to land before you get there. If the spot starts going underneath the airplane, that means that you're going to overfly it. And it doesn't matter whether you're on short final, maybe a half a mile from the runway, or if you can see the airport and you're 10 miles away from it. If that place stays in the same place in the windshield, you're going to land on it. Okay. So you want to keep the plane as clean as possible and save the landing gear. Some people say midfield downwind, other people want to hold it off. Depends on your tolerance and how convinced you are. But the most important thing is to use a checklist and keep the pattern tight, and don't do like this guy who actually had an engine failure and then landed with the gear up. On a runway. You know, it's a different story if you're landing off field, but he landed on a runway with the gear up. I had a situation where I was coming back from Bakersfield, California, and we had an issue with the fuel. We weren't quite sure. The left tank was reading very low and the right tank was reading full, and we had been flying for a couple of hours, and they should have been pretty even. So we weren't sure whether or not we had a fuel system indicator error, or we actually had run that tank down far. So the concern was whether or not if we switched to the fuller tank, whether or not the engine would keep running. So what we did was we just picked a spot where if we had an engine failure, we were going to be sure that we could make the airport. And in this case, as when we switched the tank, the engine kept running, so we kept on going. Another thing that I see, this is from flight tests. This is Austin Bergstrom Airport down here. When you take off out of Austin and you're going north up to Taylor up here, they bring you outside of the class Charlie airspace, turn you north. So we're going up north here, and if you count, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 airports before you get to Taylor. Whoops, that was supposed to move. And on flight tests, I will often ask them, you know, if the engine stopped here, where are you going to land? Very, very few people choose to land at the restricted airports. There are grass fields. They are sometimes hard to find. However, they're there, and you should be aware of them. One of the big problems is that if you have a G1000 or 430 or 530, these airports don't show up on there. But if you have Garmin Pilot or if you're flying with ForeFlight, they will definitely be on there. And with the geolocation, you should know that you're right over them. You know, even if you didn't land on the airport, landing next to somebody who's airport friendly is going to certainly be a better option. So let's talk a little bit about where you're going to land if you have to make an off-airport landing. Okay, so on short fields and soft fields, I'm going to digress a little bit actually first. Short fields and soft fields, one of the things that I find a lot in tests is that people don't know how to make good short field and soft field takeoffs. And mostly it's because they never practice them on short and soft fields. And the techniques are really very different than if you practice a short field landing on a hard surface runway or a short field takeoff on a hard surface runway or a soft field. So one of the things that we want to talk about is if you had an engine failure on takeoff, where is going to be the best place to land? One of the things that most pilots don't realize is that that myth about the 500-foot turnaround to get back to the runway is pretty unlikely. If you do manage to have an engine failure at 500 feet, your best option is to just land straight ahead, not more than 30 degrees off the nose, the slowest airspeed you can possibly get down to and still keep control of the airplane, using the headwind to slow you down and to fly as far into the crash as you can, as Bob Hoover said. One of my other DPEs always says, you want to land like a wuss, wings level, under control, straight ahead within 30 degrees of the runway heading and at the slowest possible speed. So how do we choose a field if we do have to make an off-field landing? Well, the glider pilot at 2,000 feet has a field in mind where they're going to land. At 1,500 feet, they're commit to land, the checklist is done, and at 1,000 feet, they're in a landing pattern and they're committed. They're going to land now. And you try to make the landing as normal as you possibly can. Well, when you make an off-field landing, there is probably, you're not going to know what the field elevation is. So the way glider pilots use for judging altitude, especially out here in Texas, is the cows and chickens method. At 1,000 feet, you can see the cows. At 500 feet, you can see the chickens. So where are we going to land now? Well, a plowed field is the best. If you land with the furrows in a freshly plowed field, in a retractable gear airplane with a gear up, you're going to walk away from it probably. The old glider pilots say if you land in the dirt, you won't get hurt. In a fixed gear airplane, you want to try to do the best soft field landing you've ever done and try to keep it from flipping over. But the possibility is that that airplane may go over on you in a true soft field landing like that. Next one is a green field. That's freshly sprouted crops. They will often be a very good field to land in. But as the fields start to change colors and the crop starts to get higher and higher, they become less and less attractive. Yellow fields like that can be dangerous because corn stalks can come right through the fuselage and work like spikes coming in at you. So if you can avoid a fully mature field, and if there's a better choice, take it. Expect that every road has a power line by it, and that every building has a power line running to it. You might not be able to see them until you're right on top of them, and then it could be too late. If you do have to land in the water, you want to, again, it's like a soft field landing. And in a retractable, you definitely want to land with the gear up. In a fixed gear airplane, the chances are it may go over. There seems to be some controversy about that. But I can tell you this, if you land an amphibious airplane in the water with the gear down, it's not going to be a good day. And it happens that fast. Okay. Fields that are pastures, usually very rocky. And if you have to land in the trees, the best way is to stall it in, get right over the trees, get as low as you can, bring the airplane into a stall and try to land at tail first to absorb some of that energy in the back of the airplane before you actually go into the trees. And one thing to remember too is never land in a field with only one cow in it. The reason for that is it's probably a bull. I will not be pleased with your presence there. So how do we deal with IFR and night flying? That's up to your risk tolerance. You know, if you feel comfortable flying at night, if you feel comfortable flying in IFR when it's low ceilings, I mean, personally, I'm not really comfortable when the ceiling's much below 1,000 feet because if you break out of the clouds, you have no time to figure anything out. All right. So maintain your situational awareness, know your aircraft wins and options, have a plan if things go wrong, land like a wuss, and get some glider training. It'll improve your skills. It will certainly show you what those rudders are on the airplane for. And it's a really exhilarating experience and one that will definitely make you a better pilot, so that if you do have an engine failure, your first dead stick landing isn't the first landing that you've made without an engine. Okay, I have a short video here. Some people may have seen this, but it can show you what might happen in a situation where you do have an engine failure. Let's see if it's going to play.
Requesting emergency approach. AM-117 coming up to 175 and proceed to 3,000 feet. Roger the LAX. We're not going to be able to make that approach. We're having trouble maintaining altitude.
Shaping up to be a rough commute out there today. Watch for an accident on the 101 near Sherman Way. And we're just getting word that the 405 southbound has been shut down completely. Looks like some sort of police activity's got it cleared for a 2-mile stretch from the 118 all the way up to Victory. As soon as we get more information, we'll let you know. But in the meantime, we'll get you through with another 40 minutes of your favorite hits on KTPP.
So that's what I've got. I'd love to have some questions. Let me get the screen share turned off.
I have a question.
Sure.
So when we were first discussing the two airports that we were going to land back,
Yes.
I said that one of the 3R9, 3 Romeo 9 was probably a best option considering the runway direction was the same, almost the same as the flight to get there. And I noticed that the airport with the parallel runways that was to the other side, that one would have required a power off 180 in order to actually have got into those runways. Is that a factor when you're deciding what runway to aim for in an engine failure?
Well, you were not going to make it to Austin Bergstrom. That was not going to be a possibility. You only had 9 miles of glide, and you needed, I think, 11 to get there.
I know, but in the situation you could have made both of those. Is it better to go for one where the runway is at the same direction as your flight?
Oh yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I mean, if you can, it's any port in a storm at that point. I mean, you know, with the runway at 3 Romeo 9, you actually could have flown a downwind, turned around, and gotten into the wind in order to land. You had enough altitude to do that if you did everything right again.
But would you take that risk as a pilot, or would you try and do a slip and just put it in even with a tailwind?
It would depend on the runway.
So in the example you gave us with 3 Romeo 9.
Well, 3 Romeo 9, I know that airport, and it's got a substantial, when you're landing to the north, it's got a substantial downslope. So with a 17 knot tailwind, well, it was 6,000 feet, so the tailwind would be less. You're going to land with a tailwind. You probably run off the end. I mean, it would depend on when I got there, what I had left. You know, certainly, if I couldn't comfortably fly a pattern, I'd definitely land downwind. You know, when you're in that kind of a situation, as soon as that engine stops, the insurance company owns the airplane.
Oh yeah.
Don't even think about trying to save it. All you want to do is survive it. And, you know, you don't want to have to worry about saving anything. Just get yourself on the ground and walk away from it.
Yeah. But I was just thinking, if you're going to try and make that pattern, you're then going to fly past the airport that you've made on a glide and then try and do a 180 turn, which of course the turns are the most dangerous things when you've got an engine failure.
No,
because you're losing.
I think I'd go for the sure thing. I think and land straight ahead.
Because that's a lot of people spin it in when they're just trying to, you know, they've overestimated it a little bit and they're just trying to pull it up.
Yeah.
Especially with a tailwind blowing you away from the airport in that turn.
Right. Yeah.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, as I mentioned when we logged in, I've had the Comanche 51 years, which is a few months longer than I've had my wife, actually. I don't remind her of that too often, I hope. But the early Comanches had no information at all in the owner's handbook about glides, nothing. So, and most of my flying, I go between a place called Livermore and where my mountain property is north of the Napa Valley in California, and it's mountainous the whole way, excepting the flat parts are all vineyards, and they have these nasty metal spikes sticking up that hold the grapevines. So there's really nowhere other than a few strips to land on. So, and also because I'm cheap and want to save fuel, I fly high. So I'm always doing this 90-mile trip at 10 to 12, sometimes 13 and a half to save fuel, pick up winds, and also to maximize my glide distance. But I never knew what it was. So I did a bunch of experiments starting 5 or 6 years ago of different, did just pull the engine back to as little power as I could, 1,000 RPM on the propeller and 0 manifold pressure, and just play with the airspeed and see what was going to be my minimum sink rate. And it works out to be about 93 knots, and it seems to be very much independent of the airplane weight. When I do have more weight in the airplane, as our Gregg mentioned, I get less sink rate with more weight, but I can't make any difference really show up in the best speed. It's hard to hold the speed anyway. So I trimmed for 92 knots, 93 knots, and it'll vary between maybe 90 and 94 as the plane goes through some minor oscillations. But I get anywhere from 850 to maybe 950 or 1,000 sink rate. So I figure, okay, 1,000 sink rate, and if I'm at 10,000 feet, I've got 10 minutes. 10 minutes at 90 knots is 15 nautical miles. And so I stay high until I'm within 15 nautical miles of my destination. Now, NorCal approach, since my line to Livermore just avoids the outer edge of the San Francisco class Boeing airspace, NorCal approach really doesn't like me to be at that altitude, even though I'm slightly outside the class B. And they will literally order me to descend early, which I'm reluctant to do, and I will do reluctantly. They want me to go down to about 9.5. They think the class B extends out farther than it really does, I guess. It depends upon time of day. So I'm very often gliding the last 15 nautical into Livermore or into Lakeport at the north end. It'll be late in the day either way. So I haven't much traffic, but it unnerves the tower a little bit when I call in maybe 8 miles out at 9,000 feet, and when I'm at pattern position, I'm still at 4,000. And they want to know if I want to extend my downwind or something. I say, no, I'll just slip it in. So that's what I end up doing, is slipping it in about the last 1,000 feet or so. And dead stick very often, unless there's some reason I need to conform to traffic, and there generally isn't much at 8 or 9 in the evening. And I've really practiced that a bit, and hoping I never need to use it. But at least I practiced all of that glide and figuring the distance and that sort of thing. If I've got a tailwind, I start dropping down sooner. If I have a headwind, I drop down a little bit later, maybe as close as 12 nautical from destination. But it's an interesting thing, and I'm a little curious if other Comanche pilots have experimented with their glide speeds, or whether later model Comanches actually had some published best glide speeds. And interestingly, also with the Comanche 250 at 10 to 12,000 feet, I can get it down to about 7 or even less gallons per hour. That's at 1,800 RPM and full manifold pressure. So it's just ticking over very nicely, and it's 20 miles per gallon, by the way. But what sort of glide experience do other Comanche flyers have?
Let me speak on this. This is Comanche dude, Greg Peel. CJ, we spoke briefly about this the other day, that I actually had an experience. I had an engine out 5 years ago. And nobody spoke about this yet because maybe nobody has the experience that I had. When you have an actual engine out, nobody's spoken about, yeah, you can reduce RPM and manifold pressure. You can reduce down to 1,000 RPM, but that engine's still producing power. When you have an engine out and you got a windmilling prop, your airplane is now powering that prop to spin that engine, and you might as well put a 6-foot diameter piece of plywood out there. So you may glide, at 1,000 feet, or you may drop at 1,000 feet per minute. But with an engine out, it's more like 50% more than that. You're probably going to drop at 1,500 feet a minute at least. It's like a huge speed break. Let me tell you. I had a very horrible experience where I put it down in a city and totaled out an airplane and got hurt pretty bad, but I'm here talking about it. but you got to understand that you can practice all you want by reducing power, thinking you have an engine out, when in fact, when your prop is windmilling with the plane pushing that prop through the air, it's nowhere near the same.
Question: did you find, or did you try and attempt to pull the prop control all the way back to make it as coarse as possible?
I tried everything I could. I didn't have a whole lot of time. I was on a final approach. I was cleared to land, so I was down at pattern altitude, and that's why it was in a city. I didn't have much choice of where to put it down, but yeah, I tried everything. I tried flaps, I tried gear, I tried prop, and that was very quickly. So I didn't have a lot of time to experiment, but it was at that point, it was just fly the plane.
Yeah, the reason for asking the question, of course, is that when you pull the prop all the way back from where you're typically cruising at 2,400 RPM, whatever it is, and you have an engine failure supposedly at that point, and you're trying to practice a dead stick, if not actually doing it, by pulling that prop all the way back, you can extend your glide because you're reducing the drag created by the windmilling prop considerably.
Especially if you can get the engine to actually stop turning.
That'd be the best. That absolutely would be the best. Nose it up, get it to stop. It's not like a twin where you can feather the prop.
Right. And one of the problems with a Comanche is that if you have an oil pressure failure where you lost all your oil pressure, that prop's not going to feather.
That's correct too.
Yeah.
I had a story I'd like to share about, first off, everybody's probably read this book, Stick and Rudder. There's a chapter in here, chapter 19, The Working Speeds of an Airplane. Breaks things down a little bit. By the way, Greg, thank you very much. I was working as a tech guy for the Cessna Pilots Association, and I got a call from a 210 owner that had got stuck on his way north in Reading during a big rainstorm, thought he had sumped all the water out of the tanks, took off from Reading, climbed up above the Siskiyous, and the fuel system froze up. And so he lost power, and he successfully made a landing at the airport. But one of the thoughts he had was, I pull the prop back, am I going to have enough vacuum for my gyros to run? This is the kind of thought that's going through his head. He was punching down through the clouds. And, you know, before he hit the ground, the ice melted and he was able to get enough power to get onto the runway. But I have heard, if possible, pull it all the way back, you get a farther glide. Another thing I wonder for sure about, by the way, Greg, I have a picture of a catastrophically damaged airplane engine I'll be glad to send you so you don't have to use a Chevrolet engine.
Okay.
The other thing was, which I can't remember all of a sudden. Shoot, okay, well, it'll probably come to me later, but sorry, lost it. I'm sure.
Yeah, this is Russ again. A friend who was a former Pan Am pilot and actually owns a P-51 and had a catastrophic engine failure at Reno one time at the State Air Force base races. He suggested I practice what I was doing with the propeller stop in order to see what the difference in sink rate would be. And I was unable to get the propeller to stop. I cut fuel back to 0, that is idle cutoff, and brought the nose up, and the engine slowed down to about 400 RPM, and I had the indicated airspeed back to under 80. I was actually in stall, and actually was below 80. I was down around 60 knots indicated, and I was in stall, and the engine still did not stop. So I'm kind of under the impression that unless you have oil starvation and the engine seizes, the Comanche engine is going to keep on windmilling at some speed, and you might have control of that speed. If the engine seizes, of course, that changes things, but the drag of the propeller might actually be less. with the engine completely stopped. Don't know for sure.
I remember.
So this is CJ. Oh, go ahead.
I remember one other thing I was going to say. When it was mentioned that once the engine fails, the insurance company owns the airplane, please call your insurance man, because I had a guy call me up and said he lost his engine over the Barstow Airport, made a perfect landing, coasted into the parking spot, called his insurance guy and said, there was no accident, your engine blew up. It's not our fault, you're not insured. So I haven't verified that, but you might want to check that.
I found it really interesting when you said that your POH had no glide speed or glide ratio in it, Russ, because I flew the 1963 180, our POH does have a glide speed in it. I'm wondering if that might have been added in post or not by Piper themselves now.
I really don't know. I've had two different copies of the Piper book, one that was in the plane when I bought the airplane, and it since got lost. We had the plane rented out to a club, and all kinds of things disappeared, including the book. And later I got a reprint, but neither of them had anything about, actually I've got reprints for two different early Comanches, I think up to about 1960, nothing at all on glide. So it was something that has been added later, I suppose.
Yep, so this is CJ.
Then,
oh, go ahead, Adam.
Does that mean I should take that with a pinch of salt then, as that might not have been added directly from the factory?
Well, what you ought to do is get yourself a copy of the Doug Killow updated and modernized and much more complete POH before you embark on your big trip.
Definitely. Could you, if possible, could someone put that name into the chat so I can go and get a copy of that now?
You just buy it from Webco, I believe.
That's
very cool. Thank you.
That is correct. This is Alan Cheek here in Atlanta, and I've got a friend of mine that's buying a 59 250, and I just turned him on this afternoon to Doug Kellogg's book. I thought I was almost certain he was out of business, but I put in a question out there in the Delphi forum, and I got an answer. I guess Webco is the one to get that book, and I actually had an old copy, and so I took it down to Kinko's and I just made my friend a copy. But if you can see, let me see if I can share this. I don't know how I do that.
We're actually able to see you pretty well, Alan.
Okay, well, let's see if I can find this spot.
Anybody who wants to really see that, go to the speaker view while he's talking. It'll get big.
But right here, kind of in the procedure section, if you're looking, there's your best angle speed, basically L over D. This is for a 63 model 250, but it's 100 miles an hour. And for best endurance, it's 85 miles an hour.
Right. So what's important about what Alan just said is that those figures are provided at max gross. And they change surprisingly substantially when you are light. So our Comanches have an amazing amount of stuff they can haul. Even the 180s usually have a useful load of around 950 to 975, let's just call it 900. And then, the 400s can carry, what is it, a honking 14 something, and the 260Cs 1250, and the 260Bs around 1150. So when we are lighter, that number decreases, and it can decrease about 8 miles an hour. So it's part of the reason that I wanted this topic was that it changed so much when we're really light. And because it can make a difference to how far you glide, if you really need to be a glider, it's helpful to know how to calculate that. A couple of people, I do want to just go back to the chat window for those who've been posting. A couple of people have asked about how to enable that glide ring in ForeFlight and Garmin Pilot. And Pat Donovan posted in and said that page 166 of the user guide will talk about enabling it, and also about where to get where it's getting its winds aloft information, which is either what you packed. So in ForeFlight, when you set up your flight plan, there's that little thing that looks like a suitcase that you hit that says pack, and then it downloads all the information it can. If you have either ADS-B or SiriusXM weather, then it will continually update that while you're in flight. And then to set up, people post into the chat window, but when you set up your aircraft, one of the things that you set up is best glide. You set up your aircraft, so you say, oh, I want to put in, like Comanche 7654 Papa 180, for example, because I have a bunch of Comanches in mine because I've fly more than one. And so you set up all the specific speeds and fuel consumption, et cetera, for your particular aircraft. One of the figures to put in there is best glide. And you'll note when you put in the default Comanche into ForeFlight that it doesn't have a figure for best glide. It's got a default figure for just about everything else. And part of that is because it varies depending on, on your loading, basically, how much you're carrying mostly. Other people asked about, well, does anybody want to comment on that? Because I was going to move on to other people asked about what to use for best glide.
I use, over here in Europe, Sky Demon is a really good bet. Not really good out in the US, but in Europe and I think Australia as well, they're quite good. And that has a default setting for 180 and a 250, both with best glides already fitted in as well.
Mm-hmm. So the big thing to be aware is that whenever you see a default best glide, it is at max gross, and that is going to be the high end of your best glide speed. So Greg, do you want to talk at all about how best glide varies with weight and other things before we get to default figures?
Correct that the speed is going to decrease as your weight goes down, and it can get down to as low as, some people say that the way to look at the best glide is about 1.3 VSO.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty much the speed you come over the fence at is where you want to be. And often it's a lot slower than you think. I was a little bit surprised at 100 miles an hour on the, or was 100 miles an hour or 100 knots, was it?
100 miles an hour.
100 miles an hour, yeah.
Yeah.
87 knots, according to the book.
Yeah. Well,
right.
1.3, 1.4 VSO is going to get you pretty close.
Mm-hmm.
But
right.
It's without those LORD graphs, it's very hard to tell, and airplane manufacturers don't show these.
Yeah.
So, you do have to do a little bit of calculation and experimentation yourself.
Yeah, we probably should set up an online lesson, or maybe just poll people. If you've done your own experiments to try to determine what your best glide is, it might be worth posting it. I've asked this question, and it looks like it gets down to about, is it 83 or 93 if you're pretty lightly loaded? And that's the thing I need to check is, did it start at 100 or did it start at 90? Because I think that 100 was high.
That seems very high.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, again, I would assume that this is a gross number, but the old Kellogg book doesn't differentiate that. It just says emergency airspeed, and it gives you a best engine out glide speed. Optimum is 100 miles an hour or 87 knots, and then best engine out glide for endurance is 85 miles an hour or 74 knots. And again, I would assume that's at an airplane that's 2,900 pounds. So
mm-hmm.
This is Greg again. Hey, CJ, let me say something about my experience. I was I still had right at about 70
You
gallons.
were not in a Comanche, right?
I was in a Comanche, yes.
Oh, you were in a Comanche. Okay,
yes,
yep.
in a 250.
Yep.
70 to 72 gallons still on board. And I made the decision to fly the plane until I ran out of air at 79 knots. And that was trying it with flaps, without flaps. I only had 2 minutes to do it. But that's what worked for me, 79 knots. And I think that's right in that area, right in that speed.
Yeah. So
CJ, can I jump in here on a 400, because I'm still a fairly new 400 driver. I've had it for a year and a half, but it was in the shop for 6 months getting the engine completely redone. I initially was using 104 knots as a best glide. But then when I got the updated manual from Webco, I changed it to 100 knots. Can any of the other 400 drivers share their experience? And obviously, when you're at altitude, you don't have your flaps out, you don't have your gear out. So right now I use 100 unless I'm right at max gross at 3,600 pounds, then I use 104.
What's the stall speed on that airplane?
Stall speed on, I think it is 59.
59. Well, at 65.
59 is, you know, dirty.
Right. At 65, 1.3 VSO is 84 and a half. So again, that 100 seems fast.
It does.
Well,
actually, in my airplane, I have the alpha system angle of attack, but I haven't really done it. Now I got something to do next time I go flying. So I'll have to go up there and pull it and then just power back and then just set it up for light up the donut and see what I get. So real quick, also, CJ, when you're setting it up in ForeFlight, are you setting up a glide ratio or do you set up an airspeed? What are you inputting into that section?
They actually ask for both, if I recall, and I often will fly with iFly just because it's super intuitive and quick in the air, and I'm flying an airplane with no nav radios and just me. But if I recall, and can anybody jump in ForeFlight? If I recall, when I set up my profile, requested both a best glide and a glide ratio.
Okay.
That's correct. It asks for both.
Yep. So a couple of things. I just was involved with ferrying a Comanche that needed to ferry with its gear down. And so I, of course, texted Zach Grant and I was like, what do I put in for glide slope ratio for Comanche with the gear down? And an otherwise very clean bird, it was a C, so it had the beautiful knots to use style cowling. And he said 7-to-1. So useful piece of information with your gear down, your glide ratio is 7-to-1 or more or less. The Comanche Tips Manual at one point said that with your prop pulled all the way back and your gear up, the Comanche is quite efficient, as we all know, and its glide ratio was stated to be as much as 13-to-1. Don't count on it because your dirty wing, your little bit of, turbulence from your gear not being quite right will change that, but it's quite an efficient glider. However, Greg and I discussed this and he had some pretty interesting and useful input on that. So before we get too optimistic, Greg, do you want to say what you told me when I was like, it's supposed to be a great glider as long as we pull the prop all the way back and pull our gear up?
Well, the fact that you can't get the prop feathered is the biggest thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, I use a 10-to-1 glide ratio because, just 12-to-1 is just way towards the part where I can't make any mistakes. If I lose a little bit of airspeed or gain a little bit of airspeed, that 12-to-1's out the window. So if you're looking at 10-to-1, you're a little more conservative and you've got an airspeed that's going to basically work for you. And again, I look at that 1.3 to 1.4 VSO is where I want to put that thing. And yes, you've got to kind of ballpark it because you're not going to know what your weight is exactly unless you're doing calculations all the way through your flight, but you can figure if you're halfway through it, you've burned, X amount of fuel and that's going to weigh so many pounds. That's, the thing with gliders that's great is if you don't carry ballast, you land with the same weight you take off at it. So you never have to concern yourself with that.
Right.
But with airplanes, that's a different story. Yeah, you're landing at a different weight than you're taking off at. So, the VS, the vertical speed indicator, the VSI, is going to be the best thing that you can be looking at, and see how little sink rate you can get out of that thing. Go up on a calm day and just play with it until you can see where it wants to be in order to, what airspeed is going to work best and be able to maintain an altitude, not maintain, but descend at a given altitude. Descend at a given rate in order to get you down. You know, if you can hold 500 feet a minute, you're doing super.
Mm.
CJ,
yep.
CJ, one other point I want to add. When you mentioned that Zach said 7 to 1 glide ratio, I think
with
that's
your gear down.
Well, okay. What I didn't mention last time was that, and nobody's mentioned, is when your prop is windmilling, use that 7 to 1 because you're not going to get any better than that. Whether your gear's down, your flaps are out, but if your prop is windmilling, it's just a huge piece of plywood in front of your plane, and it's gonna drop you like a rock. It doesn't glide. Comanche's a great wing, but it doesn't glide very well without an engine at least turning the prop. You don't want the plane turning the prop, but that's what happens when you have an engine out. And from experience, I mean, that's all you get. That's all you get.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is Russ Greenlaw again. When I did my experiments for my minimum sink rate, that's not necessarily best distance, coming out around 92, 93, 94 knots. I was getting somewhere around 900 feet per minute descent, and 90 knots at low altitude is 9,000 feet horizontally. So that is a 10 to 1 ratio. Disregarding the increase in if the engine were completely off. I could try that with the mixture cut back to nothing, and that way I'll not be pulling power. I'll give that a try next time I get a chance. But at altitude, one's getting far more than 9,000 feet per minute at 90 knots. So that skews the distance one can glide. If you're starting off at 10,000 feet, for quite a bit of that time, you're getting more than 90 knots. That is a nautical mile and a half over the ground. So I've never really taken that into consideration. One can refine this quite a bit, I think.
Just out of curiosity as well, the tip tanks, because they often act like winglets, do they increase our glide distances or change our glide speeds?
Don't count on them.
In theory, tip tanks do increase your lift, and that's why adding tips to a 250 gives you 200 pounds of additional load if the tips are empty and 100 pounds of additional load if they're full. So in theory, your tips should give you a little bit more, but what we don't know is what actually happens. What's sort of surprising is we have a large number of pilots. We have over 80 people still here in the Q&A, and have any of us other than Gregg gotten a pretty good sense as to what our actual best glide is?
Like I said, in my POH, our best glide speed was 93, as you guys have said.
Is that knots or?
Miles an hour.
Okay. Well,
and also, if you're going to experiment by pulling your mixture to essentially shut the engine down, please be really high, at least 10,000 feet, please.
And have landing space ready in case it doesn't come back up.
And over an airport.
Agreed.
Right.
But it would be a good practice. It would definitely help.
Would that be a good idea to have a CFI with you when you're doing that as well, or unless you are a CFI
I think
yourself?
It'd be better to have a parachute.
I would
definitely want to have an instructor with you to share the blame.
The only engine you have down.
Yeah, say that again, Gregg.
I said I would certainly not recommend shutting the only engine you have down.
Right. It's a real testament to the Lycoming engine that the singles are driving behind, that we're sort of like, well, some of us have landed without our engines, but it's not too many of us, I don't think. How many have had
an
an
end up
engine?
landing without fuel than without a working engine.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, that's true. So I posted this into the chat because it came up, but the only time your fuel gauges are legally required to read properly in a Comanche is when they are at 0.
That is not true.
Really?
That is not true.
Ah, correct us.
If you look at if you look at FAR, I believe it's 205. It says that for VFR flight, you must have fuel gauges that indicate the quantity of fuel in each tank. It doesn't say that they have to be empty. That's a certification thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a requirement for actually flying VFR or IFR. For IFR, you have to have it too also. But the fuel gauges must work. If you fill up your tanks, this is technically now, if you fill up your tanks and go inside the airplane, turn the switch on, and the left tank reads full and the right tank reads half, and you know they're both full, that plane's not legal.
I agree with you, Greg. I've read the same thing in one of the FARs. I don't know what it is. It's been a long time, but it's a big controversy where people say, no, they only have to be accurate when they read empty. That's not true. I agree, totally.
They're just confusing two different regulations. One's a certification reg and the other is airworthiness reg.
That is correct.
Yep.
Okay.
So the bottom line is,
what about,
I've been flying for 40 years, almost 39. I have never trusted a fuel gauge yet.
I agree. How to
Good
stop
plan.
Know how much you have and know how much you've used.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And we had created, just 1 second, Adam. The other thing that's a wonderful idea, and we're a little off of best glide and minimum sync, but if you happen to have an empty tank or one that's close enough to empty to easily empty, get a paint stick, or there are some great PA24 calibrated sticks that you can buy from. I forget if it's Sporties or somebody here will know, but each tank is slightly different. And if you get a paint stick and a marker and a siphon and a 5-gallon jug, and you start pouring in your fuel, 5 gallons or even 2 gallons at a time, you'll create an individually calibrated stick for your particular Comanche. In general, you only need to do it once your bladders are sort of broken in and have filled the inside of your metal bladder or container in the wing, then they're not going to change much. But our tanks, although they're technically 30 gallons in the mains and 15 in the auxes, unless you're driving a 400, in which case one of the 400 drivers will jump in and say what it is for the 400s.
Yeah, it's 35 in each aux.
Mm-hmm.
About 5 minutes of fuel then.
Right. But the big thing is, I have heard of tanks that actually will hold 32 gallons and you'll still have that 2 not usable. And a few that are like 29 and a half. So if hopefully you're never planning your cross country to that, where that really makes a difference, but we all know that sometimes it does. So having that really, custom calibrated tank stick for your Comanche is an amazing thing and worth doing.
To your point, CJ, I know that on one of my aux tanks, because I have accidentally run both of them dry more than once, so I know that there was no more usable fuel in them. They're supposed to have no unusable fuel in the aux tanks.
Mm-hmm.
And but being that they're kind of old, so I've filled them both up from having run out of fuel, and I haven't gotten 35 in either one of them. So probably the bladders have collapsed in a little bit, and I only get about 33 and a half in one side and 34 in the other side. The other thing about my aux tanks, and I don't know if this happens on the 180s, 250s, and 260s, but in the case of the aux tanks, I can't even measure fuel on a paint stick until I've got at least 20 gallons in there. That's the first time I can actually see fuel below the fuel neck.
That dihedral is getting you.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. The dihedral being the fact that our wings kind of point up on each side from the fuselage.
Hey, my recommendation is to put in size senders. And when you calibrate them, you're putting in 1 or 2 gallons at a time according to their procedure. And you'll know how much fuel you have in there both by gauge, by your fuel burn and time. But what you don't know with any sender or any fuel gauges, am I leaking any? And that you don't know. So it's good to have a fairly operational fuel gauge. That's why I put 4 size senders in mine now.
Sorry, what was the name of the senders? Could you put it in the chat?
Yeah.
It's CIES, C-I-E-S.
Got it.
One of the things we didn't mention, so when we talked about best glide, we were talking about total and catastrophic engine failures. In the event we have a partial engine failure where the engine starts to run rough and appear to be damaging itself, do we shut the engine down and work on a total failure, or do we keep the engine going at the risk of causing much more serious damage to the airframe that we're currently relying on keeping us in the air?
Keep it going.
Where are you? The first thing you want to know is where are you? You know, if it's going to take the engine to make the airport, I'd run the engine and try to keep it going as long as possible.
Take a stab at that one only because I have I've lost an engine in a Cessna 172 college days. I've lost a military engine. I've lost airline engines. So now you might go, gee whiz, Alan, you're kind of a bad luck dude, but I have not lost an engine in my Comanche. But in the case of the 172, I was actually ferrying it from, and Gregg would know this place, but anyways, from San Marcos, Texas, out towards Beaumont, Texas, for an engine overhaul. And so I was flying along and just coming up towards Houston. And so I decided, okay, well, I'll just climb above the TCA. And this was back in the days that the TCA over Houston was not as big as it is today. In fact, I don't even think it existed south of downtown. But anyway, so I said, well, I'll go ahead and climb up to about 7,500 feet. And all of a sudden I'm sitting there and I'm smelling something burning. And I go, what the heck is that? I increase the mixture. And then all of a sudden I'm looking up the oil pressure and that thing is dropping to 0. So the engine obviously was running extremely rough, brought it back to idle. There was just no way that engine was going to run, you know, if I added power or anything like that or tried to. So again, I agree. It is different for every situation, but unless I'm like right over the airport or I know I'm going to make it, I wouldn't, my personal opinion, I wouldn't necessarily keep that power up and just grinding that engine more. But like I say, each situation is different. The other thing I'll just throw in, and I'm trying to think of the airport I headed to. It was West Houston, I believe. That's not, or Woodside. It's just right off of I-10 as you're heading towards San Antonio. But anyways, you know, so I ended up, and I was very familiar with, that's where I learned to fly at a Houston Hobby. Those were one of the little outlying training fields. But I remember declaring an emergency basically on a Unicom frequency. And, you know, as I came in, I really didn't have the altitude to sit there and quote, do a downwind, a base, a final. So I ended up coming in pretty short on whatever, I can't even remember. I ended up actually cutting the guy right off of his final. Turned out he was an instructor with a student. So he ends up landing, comes over and parks and comes marching up to me in my airplane going, hey, what do you think you're doing? And then he looked at the nose wheel covered with oil and he went, oh. So, but yeah, so I guess my whole point on that is, you know, for a while back, we were discussing, almost like, you know, you lose an engine, you're trying to get to pattern altitude. Hey, whatever works. If you have to cut across the middle, land downwind, whatever, get it on the ground. Don't get in the mindset of, oh, I got to do a downwind, I got to do a base, I got to do a final.
Let me comment on something that I watched just this past week, some YouTube video where a flight school that had a run out engine said, you know what, we're going to try a little experiment here. and they took I think it was a 172 with a 0320, just your generic carbureted 4-cylinder, and they disconnected an oil cooler line and extended a hose out to a 5-gallon bucket. They fired up the engine. They warmed it up a little bit. While it was warming up, within 30 seconds or less, thereabouts, all the oil pumped into a 5-gallon bucket. I said, okay, we're going to run it up to full throttle static RPM. It ran up about 2,200 RPM, and they left it there. This is kind of like the old brick on the gas pedal that we did as kids, you know, with an old car. Let's just see how long it runs. Well, they did that with an airplane. It was kind of sad to see them ruin something like this, but it ran at 2,200 RPMs for 20 minutes with no oil in it. Wow. So if you think you're having an engine problem and you think you might want to shut it down, like somebody else said that, hey, the insurance company already owns it, fly it to the ground. Just fly it. You know, as long as that engine's running, keep it running. It ran for 20 minutes, and it was kind of sad to see them ruining an engine, but it proved a good point. Now, I would think that the hydraulic lifters would collapse right away. You would have no oil, so your valves aren't opening. You'd lose power. But, you know, I guess it was a well-worn-in engine, a 2,000 or more hour engine, and it was pretty loose to begin with, maybe. I don't know, but it was kind of interesting to see.
Was this the Fly 8 Mike Alpha videos where they've got that PA28 they're basically ripping apart?
You know, it might have been a PA28 140. Yeah, I think
this old
so.
blue and white one, which was a rental air thing, and then a couple of things happened to it, so they decided to use it for experiments.
It may have been. Yeah, I just watched it a few days ago. I was intrigued with the engine, just, you know, running like it did, and I didn't pay attention too much of the airframe. I thought it was a 172, but I think you're right. I think it was a 28. I think if
he
you
did a couple of
Google it.
he did a couple of ones. He this one about aircraft chocks, and he demonstrated the importance of being careful around propellers with it as well.
That wasn't part of this, but I think if you Google, I'm sure you can find it, because it's currently somewhere. I think I may have found it on the Piper forum. They talk a lot about PA28s. I believe so.
Awesome, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure, but considering it is 2 a.m. here in the UK, I'm going to pop off. Yeah, thanks. I'll be back next Thursday.
Thanks for being here, Adam. Good luck.
Bye-bye. Could you send me the message for that chap that also wants to fly around the world?
Yes, I will do that. Adam, you put your email into
I have,
the chat
but
window?
I'm active on the Facebook page. I'm the, you know I
Oh,
am.
sure. Okay, good. I'll find you. If
Steve,
you haven't,
picture
just
of a plane
send me a
wing.
message.
Yeah, for everyone, this is being recorded, and assuming I can get off of it tonight and get it all fixed up, it'll be available tomorrow.
Right. And a quick time check, it's 9 to 9 p.m. Eastern, so we generally leave these open, but Pete will generally stop recording in a couple of minutes just so he can let the spooling start to happen. I did want to just do a couple things. Alan Beard, if you're still here, did you want to talk a little bit about that very useful observation about insurance companies being willing to return your airplane to an airport and cover things, but not always so willing to cover things if you actually manage to get it to an airport yourself? If not, oh, I'm sorry, it was Robert Beard. He mentioned that if you can safely land in a field, it may actually be better than landing on a runway because your insurance will return your airplane to an airport. But do nothing if at an airport. And so he said safety is obviously first, but if it comes down to it, something to keep in mind. The other thing that came out of this preparation is twins are set up to automatically feather if they lose oil pressure. So I said to Zach Grant, why don't singles? Like, why is it that singles are different? And he said, well, engines can run on very little oil. Like, for example, the 180's 0360, I don't know if you know this because most of us try to keep plenty of oil in our engines, but the minimum oil, according to Lycoming's own manual for the 0360 is, anybody know?
2 3/4?
Two even.
Wow.
Uh-huh. And that kind of goes to what Gregg had said about how little it takes. So anyways, so Zach replied, engines can run on very little oil, so it may be a while before you actually lose the engine. And therefore, if you've got a low oil situation, that would explain why a single engine is different. It's not set to have your prop just go, to feather in that situation. But then he mentioned something very useful. Losing a governor, a prop governor, is also an issue that could cause this. And at that point, the engine may be able to run indefinitely. So we were talking a little bit about overspeeds. And he said the big issue is that if the prop goes flat, you need to slow the plane down to slow flight, like really to slow flight, in order to keep it in the air. Like, try like 80 miles an hour. You need to load the prop or else it will overspeed with any power. And if you pull the power back to keep RPMs reasonable, it will be all drag and thus keep the prop under more likely to keep the prop speed under control. So I thought I would throw that in there just because while we're talking about when you don't have a full engine out, but you do have something like you're getting oil all over your windscreen and you know that you're likely to run out of oil, you need to make your decisions about, well, I'm going to keep my engine running, which it looks like the answer is yes, but also situations where I've got a prop governor problem. Maybe your prop governor hose is clamped at both ends, and if you lose a clamp at one end, it is possible to get into a situation where you are less likely to be able to control your prop. And that actually happened, fortunately, without a problem in an airplane I was flying, and we reclamped it down and it was without an incident. But the danger was losing the ability to control your prop. If that had happened, I would have needed to know that tip about slowing the airplane way down to create drag to keep the prop from overspeeding. Random helpful hint.
As CJ said, we're getting around 9:15 or so, and what I'm going to do is stop the recording, which means that I will be leaving the meeting. Right now, Bernie Stumpf is a co-host, and just made CJ also a co-host. That means that they can run the meeting for you, and it will not die if I leave. I want to thank Gregg tremendously for the excellent job he's done to put this thing together tonight, even with all the technical difficulties. So on that bait, I'm going to bow out at this point, and the recording, as I said, will be available tomorrow on the Northeast Comanche website. Click on the link and you'll be able to see yourself on the print. All right, good night, everybody.
Pete, thanks for everything you do. Pete's now got about an hour of post-production work to get this recording spooled up. And so just so you know what the volunteers running the Zooms are. Go ahead.
CJ is Craig Hammond.